In this video, we're going to be talking about the controller aspect of the model view controller paradigm. In other videos, we've talked about the model and the view aspects of the paradigm, and we'll be looking a little bit of code here as we did in the other videos, but you're not expected at this point to fully understand what that code is. It's just a little bit of exposure to get you looking at that code so it doesn't look overwhelming when we get further on into our video series here. Now, the controller can be thought of as the code that is the coordinator between the model and the view. The controller talks and uses the model to get to the information in our database, and the controller is what calls our views and generates the HTML out of the views in our JavaScript. Now, the controller is generally called in the URL by our web browser. So when we look at the URL, you're going to be looking for a controller name as part of that URL. And inside of the controller, we're going to have specifically, this is in our Rails model view controller paradigm, we're going to have a method that gets called as part of that URL. So let's go ahead and take a look at this cookbook application we've been playing around with in some of the other videos. And again, on the top, we have a list of some recipes with some links to do some various things to view the recipe. And down here, we have a little form to search for a specific recipe. It's a very simple little application. And I'm pointing out specifically here the URL. We have recipe, which is the name of our controller, and list is a particular method inside of that controller that we're calling. Now, the actual file of the controller is going to be recipe_controller, but the list will correspond to a specific method inside of that controller. So let me switch over to my text editor and take a look at, here's the recipe controller. The name that gets called is recipe. You'll notice the class is defined as recipe controller, one name, and it's a subclass of application controller. Again, I'm not expecting you to be fully familiar with what this Ruby code is doing at this level. We're just starting to expose you a little bit. So this is actually a class declaration. It's saying this file contains this class, which is a Ruby controller. That's the name of the class, and it's a subclass of application controller. And we have a series of methods in here. The main method that we're going to look at here is the list method. And how a method gets declared in Ruby is we use the def keyword and then a method name. And then whatever is between that and an end statement is our code that's going to get executed when this controller gets called. Now, in the view video that I hope that you watch, I talk a little more in depth about how this relates to a view and how it gets generated, but Rails does more than just run this code that's in here. When this gets called as a URL, it's going to go ahead and find this method and run it, and in our case, we have a single statement that goes out, asks the recipe class, which is our model. This corresponds to our recipe table because that's our model, and it's going to find all of the recipes in there, and it's going to put them inside of this instant variable called all_recipes, which will become an array of recipes contained in our database. But in addition to this, it's also going to, once this happens, it's going to look for a view file by the name of list and generate that view. So our controller is doing a lot of extra things here to generate that view. So it does some neat things for us. And if we understand those conventions, Rails becomes very easy to do things very quickly and powerfully as long as it's set up properly and we follow those simple rules. Now, we're not limited to doing just this single method in here. We can actually call other methods inside of here, and I don't see any other examples that I've done that in this particular one, but in future videos we'll cover controllers more in depth as we actually write code for it, and we'll write this code again so you can understand it a little bit more, and you'll see how we can actually call other methods inside here, instantiate different objects inside of here, and send them into our views so they get generated. The main thing to remember is that our controller is our main coordinating code between the model and the view. And if we keep that in mind as we're developing our application and limit the amount of code that's inside of our view, our applications become very easy to maintain and update and add features to. I hope that you watch the future videos that we're going to produce. We'll go more in depth into how the controllers actually work and actually write specific code to get them to do new behaviors, that type of thing. Thank you.